We're going to be doing notes for 13.3. In your packets, there actually isn't a 13.3 lesson printed out. So we're actually just doing a couple of questions on the back side of your notes. So if you'll go to the back side of the notes and write down these couple questions we've got here. Okay, so we're going back to completing the square, which is what we did last unit. But we're just adding in a couple things now, okay? So the first thing that we're adding in is what's called a perfect square trinomial. So if I am planning on completing the square like I typically would, if we remember our rules, we want to divide our b by 2. That would give us 7. And then we would square that, and we'd add it back in. But if you notice, 7 squared actually is 49, which means I would just be adding in an extra 49, which is a little redundant. So what we can do is, if we actually notice that we've already got that square, like this 7 squared there, we can actually just immediately shrink this down to our simplified version and save us some time. So we can go, okay, this is going to go to x plus 7 squared, and that's still going to equal 4. Okay, what is different from this unit from last unit is now we're not just leaving it in vertex form, we're going to be solving for x. So we're going to take this one step further and just try to get x all by itself by square rooting both sides. So we got x plus 7 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 4. And then the square root of 4 is just 2, so that means we've got x plus 7 equals plus or minus 2. And now to get x all by itself, we move 7 over, so we go minus 7 on both sides. X equals negative 7 plus or minus 2. Okay, now we should end up with 2 answers. The first would be negative 7 plus 2. So we'll end up with x equals negative 5. And we've got negative 7 minus 2. So that would end up being negative 9. And that would be our answer right there. Okay, so that's one thing to keep your eye out, is for perfect square trinomials, where it's just we can go immediately from this stage to the next down here. Okay. The other thing we're adding would be imaginary numbers. So this whole unit's been on complex numbers, and sometimes when we're completing the square, we're going to run into imaginary numbers. So we're going to start just like we normally would here. We want to make sure that this is in standard form. So I'm going to minus 16 to both sides, so I'm going to end up with 4x squared minus 16x plus 76 is equal to 0. Now I want to make sure I pull the 4 out, because I want to make sure I just have a 1 in front of this x squared right here. So I'm going to say 4, this is x squared, and then negative 16 divided by 4 would be negative 4x. And then we leave that blank spot, and we still have a plus 76 over here. Okay, now I'm going to take half of 4x, or half of negative 4, which is negative 2. And then I'm going to square it and put it back up here. It's going to give me plus 4. But remember, since I'm adding a number here, I also have to subtract it out here. But technically, I'm not just adding 4 here. I'm adding 4 times 4. So I'm adding in 16, which means I have to take away 16 out here. Okay, so we end up with 4. Now I can shrink this down into my square. So x minus 2 squared, and then 76 minus 16 is plus 60 equals 0. Okay, so we've got it in that vertex form. Now we're going to solve for x. So I'm going to subtract 60 from both sides. End up with 4x minus 2 squared equals negative 60. Now I want to divide by 4 on both sides. So that'll give us x minus 2 squared is equal to negative 60 divided by 4 is negative 15. And then we square root both sides. So I end up with x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of negative 15. This is where that imaginary comes into play because we've got a negative number under the square root. So I've got to take this negative out and put an I there. So I'll have x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus I root 15. And then my last step to get x all by itself is to add 2 to both sides. So I'll end up with x equals 2 plus or minus I root 15. Now, 2 is a real number, and I root 15 is an imaginary number, so I can't combine those. So my answer would just be as written here, 2 plus or minus I root 15. Okay, so that's all the notes that we're doing for today. That should be on the back side of your Unit 13 note packet. There's a delta math that involves completing the square and solving, and you should end up with some imaginary numbers. Sometimes completing the square is going to be the easier method, and sometimes the quadratic formula will be the easier method. So just want to watch out for which one's easier depending on which question you're on. Okay.